Have you heard people talk about how empires only last 250 years? There's a reason for that. It's called the Pluto Return, and America is in its Pluto Return aftermath. And I want to talk about that, what that means to me, and what I foresee happening in the future because of it. So let's start with the basics for anybody who is unfamiliar. A Pluto return is something that can only happen to like a nation, a country, an empire, because Pluto takes 248 years to cycle. The Pluto return is when Pluto hits the direct point that it was at when the nation, empire, what have you, was formed. And it symbolizes basically a new cycle beginning. And because Pluto is the planet of transformation, and not only transformation, of digging up hidden and repressed sludge that is weighing you down and being toxic and getting in the way of things. Like Pluto is the planet of digging things up to the surface to be reflected upon and transform what needs transformed and shed what needs shed. Death and rebirth is a common term used to describe the Pluto, what Pluto does and Pluto's effect, right? So Pluto returns of nations tend to end in reform or collapse. The United States of America, a couple years ago, had its very first Pluto return. Now, I'm not speaking on this as a professional astrologer. I'm simply like an astrology lover. I'm mostly speaking of it with the bare basics understanding of astrology and intuitive foresight, right? So I think we are in a Pluto return aftermath. And I want to talk about the dates and how it lines up with things and what I see happening in the future and what I think our Pluto return brought to the surface for us. The dates are really interesting because essentially the United States Pluto return happened from April 29th, 2022 to October 10th, no, wait, October 11th, 2024. Again, those dates might not be perfect. If you're really serious about it, check a professional astrologer. I'm sure they have everything down to the time. So essentially, what happened was that we had our direct Pluto return, meaning Pluto hit the point it was when we were first formed 250 years ago. At that time, 248 years ago in April 29th of 2022, and it kind of stayed in that like orb, the amount where it's like a little before to a little bit after, from April 29th, 2022 to May 1st, 2023. Then it does a retrograde, which, if you're not familiar, a retrograde is essentially when a planet is moving so slowly that it appears to be going backwards. And astrology is the thousands of year old study of what is happening when the planets appear to be a certain place in the sky, right? So the fact that it looks like it's going backwards from our point of view is what matters. And they are known, retrogrades are known to be a time of like reflection. So, in the context of some sort of transit or a planet doing a thing or cycling back or hitting something else, if it does the thing, right? So in this case, it's the Pluto return. The Pluto does its Pluto return, then it retrogrades, then it does it. Well, I think both times it retrograded, I'm not 100% clear. It was in like it went back to the Pluto return. Like I think it went over and then came back and then over and then came back. So when this happens, it typically is symbolic of the fact that there is more to reflect on. We're reflecting on the lessons that we've already learned, right? So the fact that the first, and this is pretty common, but I'm going to get to why the dates are interesting. The first Pluto return, the direct hit, and then it comes back for the first time, retrograde, comes back to the Pluto return. So we're reflecting on what we've learned the first time in 2022. It comes back in 2023 in October 10th of 2023. So we're reflecting again on what we learned the first time. Then the next and last time that it comes back for us to reflect again, so it goes forward and then it comes back again. Did you learn your lesson? What do you still need to learn, right? When it comes back the last time, October 11th, 2024. for. And I find this incredibly symbolic because that was 1 month away from a major decision that the collective of the United States of America made. And listen, we're just going to go ahead and be honest about the fact that that election was major because this character is very polarizing. You can look at me and say, "Oh, I'm 30 years old. What would I know?" Well, guess what? My 80-some-year-old grandpa, who is very salt of the earth, has told me several times he has never seen a world like this. He has never seen politics like this. This is beyond his thinking. This is insane. These are crazy times we're living in. I think the only people who don't think it's crazy times are people who really don't want things to be changing, but they are, and they're eventually going to have to face that. Doesn't matter. So, a major decision 1 month after America's last retrograde hit of the Pluto return. Retrograde reflection, major decision for the American collective. And here's where we get into my intuition and my uh, opinions, okay? So you might not agree with me, but my intuition and my opinions and my discernment on this character has always been that he is a mirror of our repressed issues in the collective unconscious. He is directly out front saying all of the repressed issues that always exist, but they're hidden and repressed. We refuse, a good majority of America refuses to acknowledge these issues that we have, right? And this person shows them as if they're okay, like as if they're normal, right? But the polarizing nature of this character who is showing us our collective unconscious shadow is that he's showing us our shadow by being very upfront about it and doing, like, basically acting out our collective unconscious shadow. And so the polarizing nature is the people who refuse to acknowledge that that's a part of our shadow, and the people who are making excuses for the fact that that's a part of our shadow. This is what we're going through right now. And essentially, and I do want to say, make this disclaimer, if you're somebody who gets upset by the idea that there's like a spiritual reason for the world's suffering, I want to say this: when it comes to shadow work and like the collective unconscious and Pluto and all this other stuff, the best way to think about it is that it didn't happen because of spirituality. It is that this stuff was art. Like, Pluto didn't make people suffer. Pluto didn't make bad things happen. However, the suffering was already happening and it was just hidden beneath the surface, and Pluto forced it to be seen so that we could do something about it. It has to be seen, it has to be brought to the surface in order to reform. So the fact that we had our last hit of the Pluto return and it was in retrograde reflection a month before America collectively makes this decision. And then the decision results in something that will be not only mirroring our collective unconscious shadow back to us, the things that are already within the collective's heart, it will be doing so confidently and with a microphone in the public eye, marketing it as if it's great, right? And the longer, this is what's going to end up happening. This is the aftermath, because what we're already seeing is that the more that we see this character that not everyone has chosen, but was collectively chosen, the more that we see this character play out our collective shadow as if it's a great thing, like, you asked for this, buddy, and it's going great, the more we're seeing people go, wait a minute, I don't exactly like what I'm seeing. Like, this was my repressed shadow. They're not thinking of it this way, but they are thinking of it as like, oh, I guess I like didn't think of it that it would end this way, right? Like, because the thing about the excuse makers, right? So the projectors, they just have shame. Like, the people who are projecting their collective shadow onto somebody else, the people who would be like, this is evil, that blah, 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 but they won't acknowledge that we all take a part in this system. They just have shame. But the excuse makers, the copers, the people who try to make excuses for why it's justified, they're acting off pure fear, right? So when they have to see somebody confidently acting in an authoritarian manner because they thought it would be the best and the safest because they were afraid, but now they're watching all of these people suffering because of it. You're slowly starting to see people come out of essentially their like what it's doing is causing people, it's forcing people to look at their collective, look at our shadow in the face and go through intense periods of self reflection, transformation, transmutation, growth. I think ultimately what happens is I think the Pluto return was the point in time where our system died. Now it is a ghost, right? It is a ghost that is still haunting us. And I think what's going to happen is it's going to end up continuing to haunt us until we do self reflection. And my brain just reminded me of Practical Magic, where the sister, she has this like abusive boyfriend, and the other sister's trying to save her, and they're trying to put him to sleep, but they accidentally him, and then they feel bad and they don't want to get in trouble, so they bring him back to life and he's like haunting them, and essentially they're like haunted with their bad decisions, and it forces them to self-reflect and to grow and to go through periods of deep transformation because of the fact that they were haunted, and they end up having this greater sense of community in the end as well, as they end up like having to get support from people who looked down upon them before. And so like the experience of being haunted by their past participation in certain things forced them to grow and self-reflect. And I think that's what's going to happen over the course of the next 10 years is more and more people are going to be forced. We're going to continue to be haunted by this dead system, and people, more and more people are going to be forced to reconcile with that and go through personal growth and transformation. Now, what I see happening in the future in regards to reform, my thoughts on this are what I think is going to happen. Because again, when I think of this from a spiritual nature of what happens when somebody is being spiritually um, bothered by an energy or an entity or a person, is like this is coming from somebody who was terrified of demons for most of my life thanks to religious trauma, and now I'm not terrified of demons. Okay, so I have experience. I'm not just pulling this out of my butt. The way to not be haunted by an unwanted energy or entity is to not feed it, right? And you feed it with your energy and with your attention. So, what I think is going to end up happening is this system is going to continue to haunt us. We will eventually, people will eventually self reflect and grow so much. Like, the more people are going to do this to the point where it's the collective. It's most of the collective. Like, most people in the collective have risen above this dead toxic system. And what's going to end up happening is people are going to start creating alternatives. This is what I think. People are going to start creating alternatives and simply giving less energy to the system and putting more energy into community alternatives until basically either the system has to reform itself or it becomes obsolete. Because at the end of the day, the system only has power because we give it power. Because, and this is not like a empowerment manifestation, this is logic. Okay, we have, I think, like 30,000 people in America. And how many of those people are working for the system or are a part of the system? Probably a very, very, very small fraction. They work for us, they exist for us. If we did not give our attention and our energy to the system would just pass away. It would disappear. And this is not to say do not participate in things that you find meaningful, right? Like, If you feel called to vote, vote. If you feel called to go to protest, go to protest. If you feel called to act in meaningful ways that are aligned with you, please, by all means, do that. It will help. It will help. Do that. But like, what I'm saying is, do the thing that you think is going to help. But what I see happening is people detaching more and more from the system, in the sense that we're just going to be putting less attention, less money, and less energy into participating in the way that the system wants to participate. And we're going to end up putting more attention and energy into community based alternatives. That's what I see for the future of this Pluto return. Now, I think it's going to be a very slow process over the next 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, because we're talking about generational planets making generational reform within a collective. So I do think it will take many years and it will be a slow process. But that is what I see in the aftermath of the Pluto return.